When 10-year-old Emily Thompson walked barefoot into the small neighborhood bakery with her last pound coin clutched in her hand, she couldn't imagine that the man behind the counter was James Whitmore, a millionaire owner of an international food empire who had abandoned everything for a simple life. With her worn clothes and frightened gaze, Emily whispered timidly about the price of the smallest loaf. But when James looked up and saw those feet wounded from walking barefoot on the London pavements, the torn clothes and eyes full of held-back tears, something broke inside him. Because this little girl had the same eyes as his daughter Charlotte, who had died 3 years earlier. And what he would discover about Emily's true identity would change everything forever. The bakery, Golden Grain, was located on a quiet street in Camden, with shop windows that gleamed under the golden light of the London evening. The aroma of freshly baked bread spread throughout the neighborhood, attracting customers from every corner of the city. But for 42-year-old James Whitmore, this wasn't just a shop. It was his refuge from the world he had left behind. 3 years earlier, James had been one of the most powerful men in Britain. His food empire, Whitmore International, was worth over £2 billion and supplied supermarkets across Europe. He had everything: luxury, power, respect. But he also had a 7-year-old daughter, Charlotte, who was the light of his life. When a car accident took her along with her mother, James's world collapsed. After the funeral, James made a decision that shocked the business world. He sold everything. He liquidated the empire, donated a large portion of his fortune to charities, and disappeared. Nobody knew what had become of millionaire James Whitmore. In reality, he had moved to Camden with a new identity, bought a small bakery, and begun a completely different life. Now he called himself Jack, the baker. Every morning at 5 o'clock, he would get up to knead the dough, finding in the simplicity of that gesture a peace that millions had never given him. His customers knew him as a kind but reserved man who made the best bread in the neighborhood and always had a gentle word for everyone. It was a particularly cold November day when Emily entered his shop. James was arranging scones in the window display when he heard the sound of the bell. He turned around, and his heart stopped for a moment. In front of the counter stood a 10-year-old girl with long, dirty, and disheveled brown hair. She wore a summer dress too big for her, probably second-hand, and a wool cardigan that had seen better days. But what immediately struck James were her feet. She was completely barefoot, and her soles were dirty and wounded from walking on the pavements. The little girl held tightly in her hand a pound coin, the only one she possessed, and looked with wide-open eyes at the abundance of bread and pastries on display. Her eyes were an intense blue, identical to those James remembered every night in his dreams. Charlotte's eyes. Emily approached the counter timidly, looking up at James with a mixture of hope and fear. Her stomach had been growling for hours, and this shop represented the last possibility of eating something that day. In a small, trembling voice, she asked the price of the smallest loaf he had. James knelt behind the counter to be at her height. Up close, he could better see the signs of suffering on the girl's face. Cheeks hollow from hunger. Tired eyes of someone who had seen too much for her age. Small, dirty hands that desperately clutched that single-pound coin. The baker gently asked her name, and Emily replied, lowering her gaze. Her name was Emily Thompson, and she only had 1 pound, but she was really very hungry. James felt his heart constrict. This little girl wasn't just hungry for food. She was hungry for kindness, for human warmth, for someone who cared about her. And he, who had lost everything he loved, recognized in her a suffering similar to his own. Smiling, James told her that pound was worth exactly the price of his special bread. But first she had to promise to sit there and keep him company while she ate. It had been a long time since he'd had such a polite young customer. Emily's eyes lit up like stars. How long had it been since someone had spoken to her with such kindness? How long had it been since someone had made her feel important? But what James didn't know was that Emily's story hid secrets that would change both their lives forever. James prepared for Emily the richest basket he had ever made. Warm bread, chocolate croissants, freshly baked biscuits, and a bottle of fresh milk. He watched the girl devour everything with a heartbreaking hunger, noticing how she tried to eat slowly to make this moment last as long as possible. Sitting beside her, James gently asked where her parents were. The girl's eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. Mummy had died when she was 8 years old. Daddy always drank, and when he drank, he became nasty. While Emily spoke, James noticed details that worried him increasingly. The small scars on her arms, the way she startled when she heard loud noises, as if trying to make herself small and invisible. This girl had suffered violence that no child should ever know. When he asked how long she hadn't been to school, Emily replied that it had been a long time. Daddy said school was a waste of time, but she loved reading the books in the library. James made an instinctive decision. He couldn't remain indifferent in the face of so much suffering. He suggested she stay here that day. She could help him in the bakery, and in return, she would have all the warm meals she wanted. Emily's face lit up as if she had seen a miracle. James went to the back room and returned with a pair of new trainers, the perfect size for Emily. They were shoes he had bought long ago for Charlotte, but had never had the courage to throw away. While he tied them for her, Emily looked at him with eyes shining with emotion. "Nobody had ever given her new shoes," she whispered. But while he adjusted the laces, James noticed something that made him shudder. On Emily's left wrist, there was a small tattoo, almost invisible but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. It was the symbol of a criminal organization he knew well from his time in the business world. He looked up at Emily, who was watching him with absolute innocence. This girl had no idea what that mark meant, but James did, and what it meant was terrifying. Emily wasn't just an abandoned girl on the street. She was a marked girl, probably destined for a horrible fate that the criminal organization had planned for her. And if James was right in his suspicions, Emily's father wasn't just a violent alcoholic. He was complicit in something much bigger and more dangerous. When he delicately asked about the mark on her wrist, Emily looked at the tattoo, and her face saddened. The man with the dark glasses had done it when she was 9 years old, she told him. He had said she now belonged to the family, but she hadn't understood what he meant. James felt his blood freeze in his veins. The family Emily spoke of was the same organization that years earlier had tried to blackmail him to obtain illegal contracts with his company. An organization that trafficked things he preferred not to think about, including children. At that moment, he understood that saving Emily didn't just mean giving her a warm meal and a safe place to sleep. It meant protecting her from very dangerous people who sooner or later would come looking for her. Taking her hands gently, James promised Emily that she was now safe with him and that nobody would ever hurt her again. But while he spoke those words, James didn't know that that same afternoon, in a hidden mansion in the Surrey countryside, a man with dark glasses was already organizing the search for the missing girl. Throughout the afternoon, Emily helped James in the bakery with an enthusiasm that broke his heart. The girl seemed reborn. She laughed while learning to wipe flour from the counters, asked 1,000 questions about the baking process, and for the first time in a long while, her eyes shone with genuine joy. James watched her work and saw in her the innocence that his daughter Charlotte hadn't had time to lose. But every time he noticed the tattoo on Emily's wrist, a cold rage rose within him. He knew too well the world that symbol came from. Around 6 in the evening, while James was closing the bakery and Emily was helping him sort the last batch of bread, a black car stopped in front of the shop. 2 men in dark suits got out, and James immediately recognized the type. They were the same ones who years earlier had tried to convince him to collaborate with them. In a calm but firm voice, James told Emily to go immediately to the back room and hide behind the flour sacks. Whatever she heard, she mustn't come out until he called her. The girl, accustomed to danger, obeyed immediately without asking questions. James admired her survival instinct, but was saddened that a 10-year-old girl had to know fear so well. The men entered the bakery with the arrogance of those accustomed to always getting what they want. The taller one, with a scar crossing his left cheek, approached the counter. They said they were looking for a 10-year-old girl, brown hair, probably without shoes. The man with the scar lied shamelessly, claiming she was his niece, who had run away from home that morning. James maintained a neutral expression, gathering all the experience acquired in years of difficult negotiations in the business world. He replied that he had only had adult customers and suggested looking in the local parks, where children usually hid when they argued with their parents. The other man, shorter but with even colder eyes, asked his name, and James replied using the false identity he had carefully constructed. Jack Baker, owner of the bakery. Before leaving, they left him a business card. They said there was a substantial reward for anyone who helped them find the girl. After the men left, James waited 10 minutes before calling Emily. The girl came out of hiding trembling, and James understood she had recognized those voices. They were the bad men who always came to take children away. Emily whispered in a very small voice. James knelt in front of her and gently took her hands. He told her those men would never hurt her again, but for that, he needed her to trust him completely. Emily nodded with a seriousness beyond her 10 years. She couldn't sleep there that night, James explained, because they might return, but he knew a safe place where nobody would find her. Tomorrow morning, they would come back together, and they would start building a new life for her. That evening,
enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
James took Emily to a secure flat he had kept secret even during his millionaire years. While the girl slept in a clean bed for the first time in months, James picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't called for 3 years. It was Inspector Davies, and James identified himself by his real name. He needed his help to save a girl. It was time to use the power he had abandoned to protect the innocent one that fate had put in his path. Inspector Robert Davies arrived at the flat at 7 o'clock the next morning. He was a man in his 50s who had worked for years on the most difficult cases related to organized crime. When James Whitmore had disappeared from the business world, many had speculated about the reasons, but Davies was one of the few who knew the truth. The millionaire had chosen to disappear after categorically refusing to collaborate with certain organizations. Davies thought James was dead, but now he discovered that, to the outside world, he effectively was, and James preferred it to stay that way. James told him everything: the encounter with Emily, the tattoo, the men who had come looking for her. Davies listened with growing attention, taking notes and asking precise questions. The inspector knew that organization well. They called themselves the Golden Circle and trafficked everything: drugs, weapons, and children. That tattoo meant they considered Emily their property. They were probably preparing her to be sold to the highest bidder. James felt blind rage rising within him. He would never allow them to lay hands on her again. The problem, Davies explained, was that officially they couldn't do much. The girl's father was technically her legal guardian, although he was clearly complicit in what was happening. It would take time to build a solid case, and meanwhile, this girl was in danger, unless she disappeared completely. New identity, new life, far from London. James had the resources to make it happen. Davies stood up, specifying that he hadn't heard anything. But if a girl in danger received help from a responsible citizen who decided to protect her, sometimes justice worked in unconventional ways. After Davies left, James sat by the bed where Emily was still sleeping. The girl seemed so small and vulnerable, but also strong. She had survived things that would have destroyed many adults. When Emily woke up, James prepared her a breakfast worthy of a princess. Warm croissants, hot chocolate, fresh fruit, and homemade jam. While she ate, she told him her story in pieces. Her mother had died in an accident that Emily suspected hadn't been accidental. Since then, she had lived with a father who drank more and more and had started bringing strange friends home. One day, when Emily was 9 years old, one of those friends had given her the tattoo and explained that she was now part of a special family. She didn't understand what he meant, Emily told him, but later she had heard her daddy talking on the phone. He said he would soon receive a lot of money for her. James felt his heart break. This girl had been sold by her own father before she could even understand what was happening. Taking her hands, James asked her how she would feel if they could go far away from here, to a place where nobody would ever hurt her again. Emily's eyes lit up with hope. When she asked about her daddy, James gently explained that he had made wrong choices. She deserved to grow up in a safe place, with someone who would truly love her. Emily thought for a moment, then nodded with determination. She wanted to go with him. He was the first kind person she had known since her mummy died. James hugged her tightly, feeling he was doing the right thing. That same afternoon, they would leave London forever. But what they didn't know was that the Golden Circle had already discovered where they were hiding. At 8 o'clock in the evening, while James was preparing the false documents he had ordered years earlier as an emergency plan, he heard the sound of cars stopping in front of the building. He cautiously peered out the window and saw what he feared. 3 black cars, at least 8 armed men surrounding the building. In a calm but urgent voice, he told Emily they had to leave immediately. The girl, who had learnt to recognize danger, didn't ask questions. She took the small bag James had prepared for her and put on the new shoes he had given her. James knew every centimeter of that building. Years earlier, when he had bought the flat, he had had a secret escape route installed that connected his flat to the adjacent building through the basements. It was a precaution he had hoped never to have to use. He guided Emily through a hidden panel in the kitchen wall, which opened to a service staircase that went down to the basements. While they walked in the darkness, lit only by James's phone torch, they heard the voices of the men breaking down the flat door. Emily asked where they were going, and James replied they were going to a safe place. He asked if she trusted him, and the girl replied yes, without hesitation. After 20 minutes walking through tunnels and secret passages, they emerged in the garage of a building 3 blocks away. There waited a car that James had prepared with false plates and travel documents. As they set off, James explained to Emily that from that moment her name would be Charlotte Baker, and he would be her father Jack. Emily asked why Charlotte, and James felt a lump in his throat. It was the name of a very special girl he had known, a brave girl like her. They drove all night, heading towards a small town in the Cotswolds where James had prepared a new life. He had bought a house, set up a bakery, and created a completely new identity for both of them. While Emily slept in the passenger seat, James went over everything he was leaving behind. His previous life, his memories, his daughter's grave. But looking at this girl who slept peacefully for the first time in years, he knew he had made the right decision. At dawn, they arrived in Chipping, Camden, a small market town where nobody would ever look for them. The house James had bought was small but cozy, with a garden where Emily could play, and a view of the rolling hills that took your breath away. Emily asked, with wide-open eyes of amazement, if this was where they would live. James smiled, telling her it was her home, and suggested going to see her room. Emily exploded with joy when she saw the room James had prepared for her. Walls painted pink, a bed with floral sheets, a desk for homework, and above all, a bookshelf full of children's books. Nobody had ever prepared a room just for her, Emily said with tears in her eyes. Now they had, James replied, and tomorrow he would enroll her in school. That evening, while Emily slept in her new bed, James sat in the garden looking at the stars. For the first time in 3 years, he felt alive again. He had found a new purpose, to protect and raise this girl that fate had put in his path. He didn't know that Emily, before falling asleep, had whispered a prayer of thanks for sending her such a good daddy. 6 months later, life in Chipping Campden had taken on a serene and happy rhythm. Emily, now officially Charlotte Baker, had become the most beloved girl in the school. Her grades were excellent, she had made many friendships, and above all she had regained that spontaneous smile that characterizes happy children. James had reopened a bakery in the town center, and there too he had become a point of reference for the community. His scones were famous throughout the valley, but what attracted the most attention was seeing how he and Emily had become a true family. Every morning Emily helped him in the bakery before going to school, and every afternoon they did homework together at the kitchen table. James had enrolled her in piano lessons, and the house filled with music when Emily practiced. One spring afternoon, while Emily was playing in the garden with some friends, an unexpected visitor arrived. Inspector Davies had made the journey from London to bring important news. The Golden Circle had been dismantled, he announced, sitting with James on the terrace. 12 arrests, including Emily's father. They had found evidence of child trafficking, false documents, everything needed to convict them. James felt an enormous weight lift from his shoulders. And Emily? Officially, Emily Thompson had died in an accident 3 months earlier. The documents had been arranged. Charlotte Baker was free to live her life. They looked together at Emily laughing with her friends, swinging on the swing James had built for her. Davies said he had done the right thing. This girl had been reborn. James replied that it wasn't he who had saved her. She had saved him. That evening, during dinner, Emily asked James a question that moved him. Could she call him Daddy even when they were alone? Not just when there were people around? James felt his eyes fill with tears. It would be the most beautiful gift she could give him. Emily smiled, declaring he was the best daddy in the world. A year later, James decided to tell Emily the truth about his past identity. The girl, now 11 years old, listened to him seriously, and then commented that she was glad he had chosen to be a daddy instead of a millionaire. Money couldn't make chocolate croissants. The bakery continued to flourish, and James began thinking about expanding the business. Emily dreamed of becoming a veterinarian to help animals, and James was determined to give her every opportunity to realize her dreams. 2 years after arriving in Chipping Campden, they received a special visit. Emily's teacher had nominated their family for a national award dedicated to the most beautiful adoption stories in Britain. When the journalists arrived, James and Emily told their story, obviously a modified version, of how a baker had adopted a girl in difficulties. When the journalist asked Emily what her father had taught her, the girl replied, looking at James with adoration, that love didn't need to be perfect to be true, and that sometimes the best families were the ones you chose, not the ones you were born into. That night, watching Emily study for a maths exam, James thought back to the day when that barefoot girl had entered his London bakery. She had come looking for a piece of bread, and had become the reason it was worth getting up every morning. He had lost a daughter, but found another. He had abandoned an empire, but built a family. He had left behind the billions, but found a wealth that no money could buy. Little Emily Thompson had disappeared forever, but Charlotte Baker was growing up surrounded by love, security, and the infinite possibilities that every child deserves. And James Whitmore, the ex-millionaire turned baker, had discovered that true wealth is measured in smiles, hugs, and the little hands that cling to yours when you cross the street together towards home. If this story has touched your heart and made you believe in the power of love that emerges from the most unexpected circumstances, give it a like and share. James and Emily prove that the most beautiful families are those you choose with your heart. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate courage, compassion, and the strength of love that knows how to transform lives. Hit the bell. Remember, sometimes a gesture of kindness is enough to change someone's destiny forever. Never underestimate the power of reaching out to someone who needs it.